Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the World IA Cafe series. Thank you for joining in today. And I can tell we have an excellent, we'll have an excellent webinar, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. My name is Rupa Mishra. I'm an associate professor at Rutgers University. I manage and teach in the user experience design and product design concentrations in the MBS program. I'm also an active member of World IA Association. The speaker for today's interactive session is Austin Govella. Austin is the Director of User Experience at Synozur. He has built products and services for some of the world's largest organizations, such as ExxonMobil, Comcast, Verizon Wireless, Ashley Furniture, the World Bank, and many more. He has over 25 years of experience in this area in leading strategy, user research, service design, UI and product design, as well as product management. In his free time, Austin writes about design, collects 80s music, I love it too, and takes his kids to the park, which I used to do. Let me share his LinkedIn profile link in the chat. Okay. So I would also like you to know that we'll be recording all the speakers in our World IA Cafe series. The videos would be available on the World's IA's website. Let me put that as well in the chat. It's a great organization and to network and meet people from all over the world. If you're interested, please do join the organization. Every year we host the World IA Day, and this has been going on since 2012. The format for the cafe speaker series is this: about 45 to 50 minutes will be the talk, followed by 10 minutes Q&A. So please don't hesitate to ask as many questions as you like. Also, I would like to remind you that this is a great opportunity to network with one another. If you like, you can share your LinkedIn profile link in the chat. Let me put mine. I will also share my department's website link if anyone is interested in a master's program in UX or product design. So please do enjoy the webinar today. And now over to you, Austin.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I am an information architect, and I like talking about information architecture. I don't think that we talk about it enough. So I appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk with you. And in the spirit of being an IA cafe, you know, I probably put together too many slides, but I'm watching the time like a clock, like a hawk, so that I end in about 40 minutes from now, so we have time for questions. So as we're going through, any questions you have, you know, please jot them down, and we'll have plenty of time at the end to kind of dive into those. We're going to talk today about how information architecture works at different scales, and also how it's different at different scales, and those across platforms, scale, and time. But this is really kind of about information architecture at a broader level. So I know that whenever I join a team, even a team of designers always feel a little different, right? And maybe you did too. You wrote things a little bit different from the designers and other people around you. And for a lot of us, right, we always just happen to know the very best way to organize anything. We just know, and our way is just the best. We just know it is. And after working in IA for any bit of time, you begin to become kind of privy to a secret role behind every experience that you see. And that's something that makes information architects just kind of cut from a slightly different piece of cloth than many of the designers that we work alongside with. And that difference, I think, that distinction is really important to the type of work that we do and the value that our work has. That being said, if you are feeling like a wizard in a muggle world, I think it's definitely fair to ask yourself, what type of IA are you? So maybe kind of pick your school for the type of IA you practice. As Rupa mentioned, I've been doing this for a long time. I've written a few books. I'm just going to plug those real quick. But my first one was Information Architecture, Blueprints for the Web with Christina Wodke. And that's getting a little long in the tooth, but I'll actually reference some of the work in there later on in this talk. I've also written Collaborative Product Design because I believe collaboration is a way to get the best work done. And the design is the only way to save the world. So if you're going to save the world, you can't do it the best way. You have to work collaboratively. And then my newest book is Work the Room on facilitating workshops because that's really a great way to collaborate on things. So let's start with how information architecture works at different scales. So this kind of came to me about 5 years ago. I was called in to help a global energy company migrate from their existing digital marketing platform to another platform. They had to move a bunch of sites. They had like 7 websites they wanted to move over. And their current platform had been discontinued. Vendor support was due to shut down. That is, if anything broke, it was going to be broken. There were no fixes coming. So the client needed to move to a living supported platform. So we did kind of your typical process. We interviewed a bunch of stakeholders from seven separate lines of business. But we discovered their problem wasn't that they had a vendor support problem with the current platform. The real problem they were facing is that the current platform was slow to update and make changes, so they couldn't experiment. The current platform provided only basic analytics, so they were never sure about what worked, and it was slow and expensive to launch new sites. So we delivered a new customized digital marketing platform. From the original 7 sites, the platform has since been used to launch hundreds of websites across 12 different business lines in over 9 languages in countries all over the globe. It's been very successful. The time for updates went down from weeks to days, right? So content campaigns were always up to date. The time to launch new content went from months to weeks. The time to launch new sites went from years to months. And the cost to launch a site went down by 66%. So they were seeing huge savings, not just new capability, but huge savings in leveraging the capabilities they wanted to leverage. And of all the projects I've worked on, even till now, this was still the one that I'm most proud of. And I have some of the deliverables here to show you. This is what the sites look like, what we delivered. It all looked like nothing because we delivered a platform, not a site, right? We gave them a platform that they could use to build sites on. We did some wireframes, right? But they're conceptual to kind of show what could be done. They were not the wires used to design the sites. We didn't create any site taxonomies. We gave them systems that they could use to build taxonomies. We didn't do any content audits. We didn't deliver any templates. But the information architecture that our team created gave the client and its vendors the language and mental models that they needed to build the sites they needed to build. So instead of taxonomies, we gave them metadata and classification systems. And instead of templates, we gave them layouts and components so they could design and build their own types of pages. Now, there's an old mental model floating around that likens information architecture and other design pursuits to creating blueprints before you build the house. And so this was true probably about 15 years ago when there were no platforms or useful off-the-shelf software building sites. Nowadays, though, design is a lot more like interior design. Somebody else has already laid the slab. Someone's already built the walls. You already have the platform. You come in hoping that the platform has good bones and you can make it somewhere livable, that you can wrangle the platform to do the things you need it to do. But a lot of times, information architecture nowadays is more like fixer-upper than Frank Gehry. Most times, you aren't designing the best taxonomy. You're designing what the platform will allow, and you don't leverage the metadata that you need. You use the fields the platform makes available. So sometimes information architecture works at the platform level, and that's what we did for the energy company, right? We created a platform for them, and our information architecture helped architect that platform. Sometimes information architecture works at the site level. At each level, you do the same kinds of activities, but you have different types of inputs and outputs. And if we continue our fantastic journey, our scale grows narrower because sites are made up of interfaces. So just like with platforms and sites, to architect good interfaces, you must understand the mental models, their pieces, and how they should be joined. And just as platforms are places where sites occur, sites are places where interfaces occur, and interfaces are places where interactions occur. To architect one level, right? So to architect the interaction or to architect the interface or the site, you need to understand the scale that that level enables. For example, to architect the platform for the oil giant, I had to understand the kinds of sites they wanted to build. So even though we delivered the platform, I had to have some sense of what types of sites were going to live there. In order to understand those, to architect those sites, I had to understand the types of interfaces they might want to include on those sites. And to architect those interfaces, I had to understand the type of interactions they wanted to enable within those interfaces, right? So the information architecture at the larger scale, it constrains the architecture at the smaller scale, right? Or there's that famous John Culkin quote, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. For the oil giant, I shaped the platform, and then the platform shaped the sites, and the sites shaped the interfaces, and the interfaces shaped the interactions. And they were able to like launch content and measure how well it performed and kind of do their day-to-day jobs. But this type of shaping applies to all levels, right? So sites suggest possible interfaces allow possible interactions. The shape of the tools echo through the levels above. The echoes move down as well, right? So one of my favorite quotes comes from Eliel Saarinen, the architect. Always design a thing by considering it in its next larger context: a chair in a room in a house in an environment in a city plan. Because I understood the sites the client needed to build, I was able to design the platform in the same way I was able to create the platform because I understood the sites. As an aside, I think these two quotes illustrate the fundamental tension in the type of work that we do, right? The oscillation that goes back and forth between the room and the chair and the ass that's going to sit there. As information architects, our work oscillates across these different scales. So you understand the site and design the platform. You understand the platform and you can imagine the room. In our case, the organization. To design the room, you consider the house. Design requires that you work at different scales. So this is all pretty interesting, but I think it's fair to ask why should you care? And there are a couple reasons. A platform can have many sites. A site can have many interfaces. An interface can have many interactions. An organization can have many platforms. A society can have many organizations. These scales assimilate the way many of our colleagues slice the world and even echo in the work of influential thinkers like Gibson. In information architecture at each scale is affected by different forces. One of those forces that affects how we architect at those scales, one of those forces is the pace of change. So you've probably seen a diagram similar to this that shows each level in the system as a different pace layer. This is based on a similar diagram about buildings from Stuart Brand. That is, each layer moves at a different pace. The pace of change is different for each layer. In this case, the outside moves faster than the inside. So interactions change more quickly than your organization does. So you might think it works a bit like a bike tire, where each layer moves at different speed and everything stays aligned, almost as if you have spokes on the tire, right? So everything stays lined up. But the key thing about Brand's observation was not that each layer moved at a different pace, but that these different paces sheared the layers away from each other. The rotation is really more like the solar system, where the planets all move at different speeds. Although the needs and capabilities at each scale may align when you design them, right? So they're aligned when you design them. The different speeds mean each layer immediately begins to shear out of alignment with the others. Shearing means you're only aligned once, right, at the point that you designed for. And the more and more out of alignment, the more and more likely the layers will shear off from one another. The information architecture at each level always exists, but at a different point in time. So the chair changes faster than the room changes faster than the house. Sooner or later, the house, the room, and the chair are not what you need anymore. And that always all happens at different paces. So information architecture generally applies to one of these 5 scales: the organization, the platform, the site, the interface, or the interaction. And at each scale, information architecture operates with different constraints. Each scale changes at different rates, and each scale operates within a different design context. Scale gives us a way to classify the type of information architecture, so we know what type of information architecture we need to practice. So that becomes important for this next reason. It's actually different at each scale. So IA, if you kind of take a look at it, typically has 4 different components, right? You have the content and functionality, all the things that you have. you have the structure of those things, you give those things labels, and then you provide navigation that helps you move from one layer, from one thing to another thing. Now, the question that we ask as practitioners is really, how do we model those things? So it's not what structure, what things do we have, it's how do we model the things we have. So if you're looking at a site, that's a site map. For labels, it's how do we model what we call the things, right? So we create, as architects, we create models of the things, not the things themselves. So the answers to these questions at the site level look like this. And this is what we might think of as traditional information architecture. So when we ask the question, what things do we have? Well, we create site maps. When we ask, what do we call the things? We create a taxonomy. When we ask how we move from one thing to another, well, we create site navigation. And when we ask what can we do at the things, well, that's the content inventory. That's pretty standard for information architecture stuff, right? Information architecture has traditionally also worked at the interface level, where we have, yet again, kind of different answers to the questions. At this time, when we ask what things do we have, instead of creating a site map, because we're working at the interface level, we create a wireframe. When we ask what we call the things, instead of taxonomy, we apply the specific label, an instance of the taxonomy. For navigation, we prefer wayfinding on that specific interface instead of wayfinding across interfaces, right? So how do you move across around that specific screen or page versus at the site level, how do you move from one page or one interface to another page interface? And then you have the actual content and functionality. So it turns out you can actually apply these questions, these 4 components: structure, labels, navigation, content and functionality. You can ask these questions at each level of scale, and you end up with slightly different answers. And now, the level that I've been working at for such a long time is the platform level. So instead of delivering site maps and wireframes and task flows, I deliver maps of sites or platforms or ecosystem maps. I deliver taxonomic models. I deliver navigation and integration plans for platforms. And I create content object interaction models. At the same level, though, we have that at the same level of scale, we have interaction, right? Where the answer to what things do we have is instead of a sitemap or wireframes, we're working at the task level. We still use labels and have content and functionality, but when we move from one task to another, we don't use navigation or wayfinding, we use triggers. That's at the interaction level. And I wouldn't call that out because I feel like probably about a decade ago, I think it was about a decade ago, information architecture ceded the interaction level to the discipline of interaction design, or I think they probably just picked a really fortunate name. But one of the organizing ideas behind interaction design is that you look at how the user moves through the interaction across time, over time, through time. So what happens though with a lot of great interaction design, your users are able to move through a flow across time, but they're inside of a shitty information architecture. This is something that I think that we see a lot of times with product design nowadays. There's an entire generation of product designers who don't do any type of information architecture other than the sitemap. That's all they do. But they don't apply the information architecture thinking at the task level, at the interaction level, to make sure that as their end users move through their products and through their experiences, that they're doing it through a specific and well-formed and intentional information architecture. So for me, a lot of this thinking is really kind of existential, right? I'm an information architect. I go to the IA conference. That's my tribe of people, but I don't do sitemaps. I don't do taxonomies. All the content strategists at work always want to do the content models. They won't let me do them. So it kind of was some soul searching about, well, what the hell am I doing and why am I doing it? So I think it's a fair question to ask is why do we do information architecture? And the best way I can talk about that is by sharing a story about a coworker of mine named Morgan. So Morgan was added to a project that had already started actual development. They had interfaces and designs, they had people coding screens, they had all these screens doing all these things for this application. It was actually kind of pretty large, but they were having some trouble because they didn't have any design on the project at all. It was a product owner, some business analysts, and a bunch of developers. So they added Morgan, who was a user experience architect. So Morgan landed, she sees all these screens, and she immediately tells them, okay, instead of making wireframes for you, first I'm going to make a sitemap because you need a sitemap. They're like, no, we don't need any information architecture. we just need you to make these wireframes. We're behind schedule. We need wireframes for our developers to build. So not being her first time at the rodeo, she pushes back and says, no, you've got a lot of stuff going on here. You need a way for your users to get from one place to another. I'm going to create a sitemap so we can start building in navigation. No. We don't want any information architecture. We just need you to make wireframes. That's all we need from you. So being a good team player, she says, yes, she's going to do the wireframes, but she and I both agree, of course they need a sitemap. They don't know they have a navigation problem because they can't see that yet. But you can see if you just scattered all the screens around up on the wall, they're going to have a navigation problem very, very quickly. So she decides to go ahead and create the sitemap as a work product so she can create better wireframes, but not show it to the client. And it wasn't long after that, they created a new screen. They didn't have a way for the end user to get to that screen. They didn't have a way for the end user to get back or go anywhere else. They didn't have a way to tell the end user what they're supposed to be doing, when, where, or what happens next. So then they needed the sitemap. They added the new section. They had to navigate there. This reminds me of another story from a product designer who does fantastic work. She's a brilliant visual designer. But we were talking one day, and she told me that she had never, ever done a wireframe, ever. And she's a professional designer with many years under her belt, but never done a wireframe ever. She had never delivered any annotated screens. So not only had she not done a wireframe, she always delivered high fidelity screens and prototypes when she delivered stuff, but they had always been devoid of annotations. She had never had to give someone a screen and tell them, have a little arrow pointing something that says, this does this, or this is that thing, or this comes from this place, right? It was always just the screens. So all this information architecture work, she had never done at all, even though she had a decently long career as a designer, delivering great design and great products. This flabbergasted me because, not being a muggle, when I approach a new project, I immediately do all the information architecture. Like, that's how I start. And if you come to a project and you haven't done that, I am just beside myself. I don't even understand how the world is still spinning. Like, how are you able to do all this stuff if you haven't answered these questions? And it's not like you have to take a bunch of time up front to answer these information architecture questions. It does take some time. And I think the reason this is because information architecture creates the context. If you haven't had a chance to read Andrew Hitton's book on context IA, definitely recommend it. I forget the animal. It's an O'Reilly book. I forget the animal on the cover. But importantly, IA creates the context creates the experience. So ipso facto, Latin words, information architecture creates the experience. Now, you're probably wondering, though, if information architecture creates the experience, with all these experiences being made, we have an entire generation of product designers not doing any IA, but delivering all these experiences, where is all this IA coming from that is in this world all around us, right? Well, it turns out, right, that they're just leveraging IA that's just lying around. They're picking it up off the ground, right? And you can think, if we all took a homework assignment today to go build a recipe app, we all come back in a week and we share our recipe apps, 60, 80, 90% of our recipe applications would all look the same because we'd all use the same model for the recipe app, and that would be okay. It doesn't require that we go come up with some brand new information architecture to deliver the recipe app. And that's just what has happened for a lot of product application design over the years, is that there is a seemingly good enough information architecture lying around that you can pick up and you can apply. You can take those mental models and apply those to the application that you're delivering. I think there's an important question there, though, is when is that okay? And when is it not okay? And why on our product teams, whether you're working at whatever scale you're working at, whether you're working at the platform level or at the interaction level, why have teams stop asking the information architecture questions, the basic ones, about is it okay for us to leverage this other model? Or do we actually need to do some thinking about what type of model do we need? So why should we care about all of this stuff? Abby Covert has such a fantastic title for this book, How to Make Sense of Any Mess. Because information architecture gives context to the messes that create the expected experiences. If you think about all these product experiences that we're coming across in the world today, they're all emerging out of a mess. There's some mess that somebody sees. They think, I can build an app that will make this mess better, create a better experience, and they create that app. That's fantastic. They made the world a better place. But is the experience that they're creating the expected one? Or from a product perspective, is the value that your experience delivers, right? Can it be enhanced? Or can you extract more value from your end users if you had a more intentional and better information architecture? Instead of pushing aside wireframes and sitemaps, not doing those, when is it important to kind of do that IA work, right? So that you can make sure you're creating an intentional information architecture that creates the experience that you're expecting to create and that your end users are expecting to get from you. It's become so easy to make an app, and it's becoming even easier, right? The idea of anyone making a custom bespoke app that does exactly what you want, there's entire platforms and frameworks that are being made to do that. So you can make just a single app that does a single thing just for you. And that's because the world is full of messes. Now, this photo is one of my favorite photos to hate. This is a picture of the giant plastic trash island that's floating in the middle of the Pacific. I don't know if any of you have heard of this. But there is what they call a gear. That is, there are some circular ocean currents in the Pacific. And in the middle of those currents, there is like a still or more calm area of water. And so all the plastic that floats in the world's oceans eventually ends up in the Pacific, going in these currents, and it just drifts into the center to the calm water and just floats there, and it conglomerates in this massive island of plastic trash. But there isn't a better metaphor for our world, which is just full of messes. And this is where information architecture comes in, and why it's so important that we understand how it's different at these different scales. Now, some of these messes that you're currently inundated with, and why we need you to lean in and not only do more information architecture, but also evangelize information architecture and get more people to do more information architecture thinking. How should we interact with products, right? As I mentioned, it's become so easy to make an app. It's becoming even easier. The idea of anyone making a custom bespoke app that does exactly just the one thing you need when you need it is becoming easier every day. There are entire programming frameworks being developed to make coding as easy as assembling Legos, with the idea that maybe you make a single app that does a single thing for a single user. Can you imagine that? Like if you had 100 apps that you made just for you to do 100 things that only you needed, and then you had access to the 100 apps that every other person on the planet had created for them, just in case you might want to put those on your phone or put them on your machine and use them as well. Can you think about how many different products there are out there in the world that are being made? Most of them relying on some pre-existing mental model, some pre-existing information architecture in order to work. There's a ton of information architecture work there where the work is not at the sitemap level, although that probably does come into play, but it's at the interface and the interaction level. Right? We need information architecture, better information architecture for individual screens, so creating wireframes, and also at the interaction working at the task level, just doing task flows to make sure that you move from task to task with the right triggers in the right way. That's all critical work. That's a huge mess that we're currently up to our chins in, and the water is only going to get deeper over the next couple of years. The next big mess that we're currently swimming in is how are you going to interact with AI? Currently, the answer to interact with AI is to slather it anywhere you have a command line or an Apple device. The mountain of AI options is like a mountain of content items that we used to see 15 years ago, right? All of it needs to be sorted, organized, structured, labeled in a way that makes sense, that's maintainable, and fits into our lives in the best way possible. That's all information architecture work. We need people creating taxonomies of AI and AI interactions. We need ecosystem maps of how different AIs work with each other and across each other. All that work needs to be done before we're just drowning in a floating plastic gear of AI. The next thing, and this is my favorite, is how are we going to interact with all the notifications these apps and AI generate? Every single one of these apps, products, and AI interactions has the opportunity to send a notification. But the question is, when does it send a notification, right? Why would it send a notification? Where do the notifications appear? How do the notifications appear? This is a lot like that same content problem we had, right? We had piles and piles of content that we had to move from one system to the next, but we had to have it all organized so it made some sense and we could use it. We had the same thing with notifications now, but there isn't anybody who is working on a lot of these platforms to govern how these notifications comes through. And that is all information architecture work at the platform level. And all these things live on platforms. And who's architecting these platforms, right? That these apps, the AI notifications are going to run on. Who's creating those ecosystem apps? Who's thinking about how those different systems on the platform are going to integrate with each other? How will they not integrate? When do they integrate? When do they stop integrating? All those are important IA questions. And this last one, this is the trickiest one. We have a decade's worth of what in the industry has been called digital transformation. That's where you took some old 90s, early 2000s engineering system, decided it sucked, it was crap, it was built wrong, and you built a brand new system that was even better, and so you migrated all your stuff to these new systems. But we've been doing that for about a decade now. So all these existing platforms already have all their integrations wired in. People are invested in platforms, they're tied in, they don't want to go anywhere else. Who's going to fix all these existing platforms as we slather all this AI, stack in all these new apps, and start wiring in all these notifications across these old platforms? They were done poorly in the first place. Someone has to go in and fix that. And that's even tougher work than if you think of like greenfield IA, you come in and there's no platform yet, but you're going to do all the architecture for it, kind of like creating a city plan, and then allow things to kind of build up. That's easy to do, but going into a system that's already plumbed and wired and having to move pipes around and rewire things while the system is still working without bringing the system down, that's tough work. And we need information architects to work at that level as well. So importantly, right, information architecture, from my view, and this is a casual kind of cafe conversation, but information architecture, from my view, is not just sitemaps, taxonomies, and wireframes, right? There's a whole, there are many different scales that are designed to work on. They work on the interaction level, the interface level, the site level. They work at the platform, organization, and cultural level. And at each of these levels of scale, right, we have IA questions to ask and answer. And our work at these scales looks different, but we still ask the same types of questions. At each of these levels of scale, we still need to understand what content and functionality is at play, right? How are we going to distinguish these items? How are they going to be structured? What labels will you give them? And then how will you move from one thing to another? How do you navigate or transform the experience based on different triggers in the environment? All this information architecture work is stuff that that we need to be working on. And this is how I see IA being at different scales. But as you can tell from this diagram, and I'm hoping that we can have some good discussion here, the places where it's bold, I feel pretty confident about what I've kind of stuck in that box. There are places where you'll see that it's not bold. That's places where I think it's definitely more open. But that is my view of information architecture, the different scales, and how.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Austin. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. And we'll end the webinar here then. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Y'all have a great evening.